Welcome to the Inside Post podcast, Eric.
Thanks, Idris, and good evening to everyone.
Yes, we've been wanting to have this conversation with you as someone who's heading up the local football association of Langa and Wanderers Football Club as well. Just tell us a little bit about the history of the LFA. Where does it come from? And as someone who is heading it up, and we've seen some success stories coming through there.
Okay, well, Langa Football Association, as we call it, Langa Ndabeni Local Football Association, is an LFA which was combination of Kukuletu under the Lagunya Football Association at the time, and with the demarcations and the changes in football after unification. Langa obviously became an independent LFA as Langa Football Association. It was established in 1952, but there's always a debate about the actual date. Some saying, it became Langa Football Association in 1960, but we trace it as far back as 1952 because it existed at the times when there was still, the issues of segregation in our communities, but it existed under Lagunya as Langa Football Association. The dynamics at the time were obviously different. You had teams from Kukuletu playing in Langa, teams from Langa playing in Kukuletu. So we've progressed from there, and we've became an independent LFA, just like everyone else became an independent LFA. And over the years, I think we have adopted, our history as an LFA. Hence, we included Ndabeni because Ndabeni was part of the township which most of the people from Langa were forcibly removed from, and they stayed in Langa. So, to capture the history, we decided to include the Ndabeni part in Langa. So we're here now, and that's basically the short history of it. We've had so many stalwarts, in charge of Langa Football Association. People like, Victor Masepe, who was one of the longest serving presidents, and, Pech Ngubo, who passed on. And I suppose we've taken over from those kind of leaders. Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at this history, it's quite a rich history because if we talk about the segregation and if we talk about the removal, it implicates the lives that we live today and where we find ourselves in the different townships. Would you say that the local football association of Langa is in a good space? And at what point did you take the baton?
From where we were, I think we are in a good space. But it's a space where we can actually, grow and become better. I don't think we are where we are supposed to be because of many things, even internally and outside. Um, the improvements that I think we have to make as an association is obviously administrative, where we need a lot more capacity and a lot more leaders who are able to form part of the association. However, I think the positives is that from what we used to be, Langa used to have 32 teams. And I say teams deliberately because in terms of the SAPA statutes, we should have clubs, which means you must have 2 junior teams and 2 senior teams as a minimum to be part of an LFA, and then you are categorized as a club. Many years ago, we obviously had a lot of teams. Anyone that wanted to establish a football team, they used to just form part of the LFA. I think now the criteria is quite in line with the constitution of SAFA, where for you to become a member, you must fulfill the minimum requirement, which is two juniors and 2 seniors. The problem that was caused by that old history of 32 teams was that anyone could join. However, during the season, when people start realizing that football is a long process, they could just stop and not play. It used to affect a lot in terms of the quality of football because you can't run football with defaults, and it also used to affect the progress of the LFA, because you have 32 teams playing for promotion. You're never going to finish the league. So we always had these issues where when SAFA wants at the end of the year the first, the top team, we couldn't give them a proper log because we just were so behind with games. So I can say now for the past few years we've actually done well, because there hasn't been a single season in Langa where we were not able to submit and comply with the requirements of SAFA in terms of submitting, the necessary teams. So I think we've done well. We've done well. We can improve, but I think we've done well.
Let's talk about that journey of convincing clubs or teams at the time to have juniors, because this has to do with the environment that one finds themselves in, where you think that tomorrow you can just wake up and form your own team, and that is a team and it is a club. And the education process when it came to having juniors as part of a club, did people really accept that, or it took some time for it to be instilled?
Look, I can tell you my journey has obviously not been easy in terms of implementing the rules of football, because you came into a situation where people were comfortable in a certain way. Just to give you a short background, when I came into the LFA in 2003, just merely as a delegate, one of the key things which I observed over a period was the fact that we were definitely not in line in terms of the rules. Like Langa never used to play with registration cards. The rule of football is simple and clear: no card, no play. But we used to have, a situation where we would run the whole league, the whole season actually, without playing cards. As I mentioned, we just had a lot of teams in the LFA, but there was no progress. We went through a process over a 4-year period where we had to make changes within the administration of the LFA, and I can tell you it was not an easy process, because when people are entrenched in their own way of doing things, when you come with new things, it becomes difficult. One of the many or one of the main hurdles at the time, we never had a constitution at Langa. We always had this draft constitution which everyone always used to refer to when the times were convenient for them. And when the time is not convenient, then we would say that the constitution is not adopted. We worked because it was not only me. I mean, I came in and there were guys that were already in there, senior to me, and I think we shared the same views and they roped me in. Fortunately, I think maybe because they felt that they could trust me, I was at the forefront. Over the 4-year period, then I think eventually we managed to put a change into the leadership. That change actually resulted in a block of the LFA. In fact, the majority of the LFA block moving to form what was called Masakane Local Football Association, which was an association within Langa at the time. And I think that's the history we don't talk about a lot. And one of my key assertions to them was that, look, we have to start becoming a football association, not a gambling association, because a lot of people like social football. And I think maybe you can say one of the things that I always fight about currently, or where I differ with my constituency, is the fact that I always insist on football, official football, not these gambling, betting and so on. And people like that. They like, because it's got vibe, but it doesn't have rules. And anything that doesn't have rules usually gets a lot of following. I think we've grown and we've become such a formidable force within SAFA, because I think I can say, and I put my head on the block, I say Langa Football Association is currently it's probably the leading township LFA, from Black African Township LFA, that is currently competing with some of the well-established LFAs. We are not as big as some of the LFAs, but I think from a governance and compliance point of view, I think we are there. So when we made this change, obviously we were not popular. Masakane was very popular at the time because they were doing what people wanted. Uh, what I want to highlight, the journey was we were left with only seven clubs.
Oh.
And for you to become an LFA, you must have 8 minimum of clubs. So we went through a process where, I had to go to that LFA and look for a team or a club that I thought was just misled. They were just going with the flow. We had to convince them to be part of this new change. And my objective at the time was obviously to fulfill the mandate of eight clubs. And fortunately, before we had our AGM, which was the first AGM because there were no AGMs, we had that and we adopted the constitution. I think everything was formalized. I started the LFA with no bank account,
Yeah.
no administration office, nothing basically, and we moved to where we are today. And Masakane is no more. I mean, it didn't even last, I think, 2 years, because I think we've been proven right from a football point of view that if you do things the right way, eventually the truth will show itself. So we are in a good space, and we've produced, I think, so much in terms of talent, and we've produced so much in terms of administrators, coaches, and it just proves that what we started off at the time worked really, really, really well. It's not glamorous because it's all rules oriented and governance oriented, but it's effective and it's working very well.
Let's dive into the division, because that was the critical time for the association to survive.
Yeah.
Was this a situation of the young and the old generation, kind of a tug of war that led to the division?
Yes, definitely. It was a case of the young and old, but I think Langa has got a dynamic which is very different to other townships. Remember, Langa has got a history of being the first black African township. It was established to actually accommodate migrant workers. That's why you find it very close to the city, because it was used during the apartheid times to take laborers from the Eastern Cape, which was called the native land at that time, the rural areas, Transkei, and place them somewhere, because the Land Area Act and the Calabar Act at those times did not allow black Africans to mix or to stay in the same place as white folks, or the Europeans as it was called at the time. So they then built Langa as a township. It was the first black African township, purely for that purpose. Now, as time obviously, went, there were changes within Langa. It was developing. Then you had, people that were born in Cape Town, not coming from the Eastern Cape, and there were divisions which are still there even today, where you know and that's what we're trying to solve with football, where people divide each other according you were born here or you were not born here, and that has actually stagnated development in Langa and in our football. So it was a combination of those two factors: the fact that Langa was led by a so-called group of people which came from an area of Langa which was not acceptable according to others, and yes, the old guard was there, having been comfortable, and we obviously had to come with new ideas and new ways, because at the time we were also football players. We saw what was happening outside. I mean, a lot of us used to go and play outside of Langa, Cape Town, Tigerberg, and so you could see the standard and the quality, and it was not happening within our LFA, and we had to obviously make a change. Some of us were now, at our last years in football, we were more into administration, and the process was not easy, because you had to now stand up against older people, and that's what led to the breakup basically, because they could not obviously be led by youngsters.
Yeah, let's talk about your training in that process, because here you are, you're hanging your boots and you're moving into the administration space. Anyone in particular that played a role in your um, time when you started to get into football administration?
Definitely. You know, when I first came into football, this person said to me, I'm trying to change something that they have been doing for many years and it's not going to change. And he actually said, you're not going to succeed, but if you want to carry on, you can go on. I'm fully behind you.
Yeah.
I'll give you the support. Um, we used to call him Stila. His name, I just forget his name, first name, but his surname is Samsam, Stila Samsam. May his soul rest in peace. But that is the guy that used to be the president of Langa LFA, but was obviously dethroned at some time. And then when I came in, he was no longer president. But I think that guy stands out, to anyone, because it was it was a strange thing that I was his leader, but he was leading the LFA before me.
Yeah.
And I think in the process I got to learn, the ins and outs and the dynamics, because I also didn't know the dynamics of the meetings. When you are young, you come into a meeting and you see people are saying things that are not making sense. You just want to stand up and talk, and there's processes in meetings. You can't just stand up and talk, or people are taking long to address small issues, and you just want to stand up and say, listen, this can be easy. But processes of meetings do not allow you to do that. So there were a few times where I was actually chased out of the meeting because, you are disrespectful according to the older guys, or you're not following due process. And he's the type of person that always used to show me that, these are the tricks of the trade. This is how you can get your point across. The tricks of the meetings is that, for example, the chairman, when they see that you are a troublesome person, they will note everyone, including you, but then before they get to you, then they get to the next point, so your point is no longer relevant. So
Yeah.
those are the tricks that sometimes were used, and you get frustrated. Then you decide, you know what, I've been having my hand raised up for so long, why don't you notice me? And then you obviously get labeled as disrupting the meeting. So you learn so much in that, from people like that, how you can raise your points and how you can go about winning the house, because what's important was to win the house over.
Yeah, winning the house. If you can't win the house, you're
Yeah.
not going anywhere.
No, no.
Now, looking at the dynamics and having ascended and looking at the history of the association, of the community, and who did you identify as the group of people that will move with you, and maybe with the other group of guys that were in the trenches with you, trying to shift the direction of the association?
At the time, we actually had a group of people or group of clubs that were not necessarily, you know, in support of the current administration. When I presented my plan, I think to them, they supported me. I can obviously, Mr. Samsam was the first one, and then I had people like Mr. Ngwindana, Nose, Wagile, a few guys, but I think I said to them that we can win, teams over, one by one. And those guys were older than me, and I think they gave me so much of guidance and so much of support of how we can maneuver the LFA. As time went, I think for me it was very important to attract new leaders and new administrators, younger ones, like just like we are trying to do now, because I think football, you have to have people who have the energy for it. The time, I think, for people that still want to apply the old ideas is what is actually stagnating football. When I say old ideas, I'm not undermining older people in football, but I'm saying football is like a science that is ever changing. If you're not going to be in line with the trends, and if you're not going to be comfortable to say that, you know, there are a lot of things that I don't know that are happening in football. Let me learn, or let me ask someone or get someone closer to me that knows these things. You're never going to go, ahead. So one of the programs which I initiated was establishing a coaching forum, establishing a referees forum, which is for officials, and we obviously try to establish, a youth forum of these coaches which are passionate, who are passionate about youth. And I started off with 0 referees at the time, and I had a target, of saying within the first year having 12 referees qualified. And I put these guys through the SAFA courses, and for them to get their levels. And I think it has succeeded very well, because we've got quite a few qualified referees. With the coaches, I think it also worked very well. I mean, Langa now has hosted the D license, they've hosted the B license, they've also hosted the C license. In that process, we've also had products that come through. I mean, we've got probably 80 or 90% of our coaches having at least a D license. That was always part of my mission, that when you sit on the bench, at least you must have a license. And we're proud of the achievements. I mean, we've got Masbu here, who's the highest qualified currently in coaching. He's got a CAFB license. And if I tell you that he started off as a referee and he only got the referee's certificates, it's a surprise for a lot of people. But he actually started off refereeing, and he obviously moved to coaching, which now he's got the CAFB, which is quite a huge achievement in at amateur level. I mean, that's a professional certificate for someone coaching at amateur level. And we've got quite a lot of guys now that are going through, the paces, and I think football is about modeling. So you show a good example, and I think a lot of people tend to follow and realize that having a certificate is actually a good thing. You become more recognized. I mean, he's now a technical director within SAFA. He's a technical director within the LFA. So it's been good to show that in terms of, if we adopt the new ways of doing things, there's definitely going to be, success. There's going to be results.
Yeah, I must admit that whenever I call you, in many conversations that we had,
Yeah.
it's easier to get hold of you, and it's also easier to get hold of your coaching staff within the LFA, and that
Yeah.
makes it a point that this is one of the LFAs that is doing quite well if we look at the achievements that you've mentioned. And I also think that that is also accompanied by the history
Yeah.
of the association and the history of the community.
Yeah. I think it's important when we are in this role to realize football has got a bad name, I think, in terms of administration. It's inaccessible. There's no turnaround times. Uh, people don't want to account. I think it's important that we don't repeat the same mistakes. When I say that, we must realize that we've got stakeholders. We've got people who can take football to another level. It doesn't only depend on us, the administrators. And uh, putting your LFA or your organization out there for people to scrutinize and to be able to comment on it, it's very important for our growth. But I also think when you've got nothing to hide, you probably won't run away much from people. So it's also important to get feedback, and you mustn't see feedback as a negative thing. So I think we enjoy that, being asked the questions, being told to account on certain things. I mean, we encourage the LFA to be involved in the social platforms, creating social platform, so that people can interrogate and make comments, and we must not feel offended, but rather take from there and say, this is the issue. How can we resolve it? So yeah, it's basically an attitude issue where we must just adjust, or we've decided to adjust our attitude to accept that we've got stakeholders, people interested in our association.
Yeah, so in the football space, coaches have accepted that it is important to get that qualification, because you're not only getting the knowledge,
Yeah.
but it also open other doors for you to be able to take or look after certain teams and be appointed as a technical director
Yeah.
and lead in that certain environment. Now, if we had to look at I mean, we spoke about quite a number of things now. If we have to dive in into the clubs within the LFA, would you say you were pleased with the quality and the standard of where the clubs are at, and are they really adopting the you know the rules when it comes to having age groups so that they can be formidable clubs?
You know, to answer your question, I'll give you a brief uh, breakdown of facts. Probably, we've got a team in the SAP, uh, which has been there for quite a while now, over 5 years. Uh, you know, Safa Cape Town has got this Coke Cup. We've never had a situation where there isn't a Langa team in the last 32. It starts from 256 teams, but we've never had a situation where there isn't a Langa team in the last 32. We've obviously done so well in terms of the inter LFA, where we play with other LFAs. Uh, we've got players that continuously get selected for SAFA teams. Uh, if I look at that, I think it says that from a club point of view, we're producing good products. The level of the clubs, especially our Premier Division, I think it is at a high level, because you know, you will get a bottom of the log team going to play friendlies, or you know, preparing for their season, and they come with feedback that the other teams think that they are actually a top team in Langa, and that's a nice feedback for us, because they're not even a top team, for example. And the average age in terms of our LFA is probably 25, which is senior level. Maybe we're talking about the oldest players. And the reason for that, when I came in, we adopted a simple philosophy, because we had to have a plan. We had to have a philosophy of how we want to run the football, where we said at junior level, we will only play first years. Now, SAFA structure allows you to play second years, for example. But we've got from SAFA National the technical master plan, which looks at the vision of how we can develop youngsters from young age to break into the first team. We've taken that philosophy from the technical master plan, and we've implemented it. We have not been scared of implementing it. You know, a lot of people are focused on the winning side of things, but I think with a little bit of patience, football will surprise you. We've got, for example, a club called the PPG, Project Playground. They are youngsters. They are not allowed to have youngsters older than 21. But PPG has been playing in the Premier Division for the past 5 years, and they've been making the top 5 of the LFA. That tells you that youth development has been there. So, and they've always been participating in the big tournaments. So from a vision point of view, we've managed to produce more younger players cutting into the first team than any LFA. When we go outside, our teams, when we play outside, most of the time, when you make a comparison, we've got more younger teams compared to the other teams, yet we still come back with the results. So the philosophy or the plan has been working very well, but I don't think we are where we are supposed to be, because there are still people who are valuing more the result, which is the score, than the progression of football, and you know, giving youngsters a chance to go further. You know, the South African football problem. A person that is 21 years old is still regarded as a youngster. But in Europe, you see a lot of 16 and 17-year-olds now cutting it into the first team. In fact, we've got the Euro now. We see youngsters, you know, 16 or 17-year-olds being men of the match in a senior international tournament. That tells us that if we don't move with the trends, we're still going to experience the same thing. So we've got good quality type of football, but we cannot be satisfied and say we've reached what we need to reach as an LFA. Definitely not.
Yeah, I'm glad you talk about the vision, that you as an LFA you are implementing it? Because there's a lot of debates that is happening in space where people say there isn't much that is happening in development. And whenever Bafana is not performing, or whenever one of the local football clubs that go and compete in the CAF competitions,
Mm.
we always go back to development. And as someone who is leading an LFA,
Mm.
um, what are some of the challenges resource wise to sort of go full circle in realizing the implementation of football development? Um, I've had conversations with a couple of coaches. Bobby Solomons is one of them.
Mm.
Bobby Williams is one of them. Where there seems to be a very, very, very prominent, lack of basics when it comes to players, and when they reach a certain level
Mm.
at a 16 or 18-year-old, then you need to spend some time focusing on the basics. And this is not where you teach the basics. You are now at another level in terms of talent acceleration.
Mm.
What is some of your challenges, you as an LFA, that you experience in terms of realizing that
Development.
football development?
I think the challenge that we're facing is probably similar to, the national problem that we have, is that you've got a lot of people involved in football, especially in youth level, that don't buy the ideology of football philosophy in terms of focusing on youth. I'll digress just a bit, and make an example of how England has now turned around and changed their football philosophy in terms of having more youngsters playing in the Premier League and so on. Now, football people by nature, they are competitive. They want to win. They are more oriented in that. But if you talk then long term and sustainability, most of the guys, they are not more in tune with that, or they're not more concerned by that. So one of the things is to try and educate people that when we talk football, we must look at long term. You might not get the results now, but what is your vision? What is your plan for the next 5 to 10 years? You might not succeed now, but if you can stick to your vision and your plan, sooner or later the results will come. One of the things that I struggled with when we were trying to make a change within the LFA, for example, the first one was this issue I mentioned of first years. A lot of people felt that I was killing the game, and I was not giving youngsters a chance. And to the extent that some said that what is going to happen now with those older players. Um, I can tell you that debate is still going on, but we have to be strong on it because I know it is right. Uh, what has happened is that because we play first years, when we go outside, we play these tournaments and so on, we are able to compete because, for example, a 16-year-old player is not allowed to play in under 16 according to our plan. But when you go outside in the tournaments, all these other tournaments, a 16-year-old can play in an under 16 tournament. So we've got an advantage because that 16-year-old plays in under 18 in Langa. So he already has a higher competitive edge to his 16-year-old peers. So that plan has worked very well for us, or let me say for the teams that have embraced it. But for the guys that are still stuck in trying to stick to the old tricks, it doesn't really work well. Uh, to the question of people saying that we are killing football because these youngsters, they get lost. We did put a second division league where they can put the players and they can start playing there. However, it's still our guys that still put the senior players, the older players. So it's a matter of, I think, embracing the vision. I know not everyone is gonna buy, what we are trying to do, but I think the results are there. They are there for everyone to see. With the first Black African township, whatever you call it, LFA, to have won the under 19 inter LFA. Unheard of, never been done before. And who did we beat? In the final, we beat Cape Town Tigerberg, the best in the business. They've got all the academies. We beat them convincingly. Before that, we beat it was Northern Suburbs, which is the biggest one of the biggest LFAs with the best in terms of youth development. Before that, we beat Nyanga, which has got a lot of talent. And the beautiful thing about that success, that win, and I always stamp on it or raise it when we talk about this, is the fact that those youngsters, they still had 2 years to play in the under 19 division. So it means they won in that year. The next 2 years they could still play in the same division. Probably they could still dominate and win it. So that tells you the plan does work if we are patient enough, and we don't really just focus on the results now, which I think is the general problem when it comes to our football. How many teams do you see changing coaches in one season, having more than 5 coaches? It's unheard of. You can't run football on impatience. You have to be patient. But you must also have a plan. You must have a plan. You must trust your plan, and you must give it time.